Testing.
Test.
All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here with us for this press conference. We are at the Climate and SDGs Synergy Conference here in Copenhagen. We have an esteemed panel of guests that we will begin with opening statements and then allow for some time for questions. So to just list all of our guests first, starting at the left down there, we have Ms. Mami Mizutori, Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction from the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. Next to her, we have Mr. Kristian Jensen, Minister of Finance for Denmark. Then we have Mr. Zhenmin, the UN Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs. Then we have Mr. Ovais Sarmad, Deputy Executive Secretary for the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And then here on the right, we have Mr. Alfonso de Alba, the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for the 2019 Climate Action Summit. So we will begin with some opening remarks. Mr. Liu, if you would care to begin, please.
Thank you. Good morning, distinguished colleagues of the press. I think the colleagues and myself were all very pleased to meet with you. We just launched the global conference on synergies between climate change and SDGs. Let me take this opportunity to thank the government and people of Denmark for their hospitality and for hosting this important global conference. I also extend my sincere gratitude to our co-organizer, the UN's Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the more than 350 participants who are gathered here. Climate change is the most urgent challenge of our time, and while the world needs to move fast, the solutions must be fair. The interconnected Sustainable Development Goals, which include SDG 13 on climate action, provide us with the best roadmap to ensure that our efforts leave no one behind. Given the many interlinkages between the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement, the integrated implementation of both agendas could significantly accelerate progress and lead to many benefits. I think as the Minister of Finance of Denmark explained to the audience at the opening ceremony that Denmark has set a good example for others. We envision the several specific outcomes from this conference. First, the outcome will be summarized and fed into the review of the SDG 13 on climate change during the high-level platform on sustainable development to be convened in New York in the forthcoming July. Second, my department, UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, together with the UNFCCC Secretariat and the like-minded partners, will establish a global knowledge network and platform on climate SDG synergies. This will build on all the resources gathered for this conference. We intend to launch the platform in time for high-level platform in July. Third, we will actively identify and promote multi-stakeholder partnerships and commitments that can directly contribute to the Climate Action Summit and SDG Summit in September to be convened in New York. Fourth, to advance more collaborative approaches, we plan to establish the SDG Climate Synergy Pavilion at the UNFCCC COP25 in Chile in cooperation with our partners. So promoting synergy between climate Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda will be a process. We are going to continue to do that. Dear colleagues, important high-level meetings will take place at the United Nations in September. In the week of September 23rd, we shall start with the Secretary General Climate Action Summit, then be followed by SDG Summit, the high-level dialogue on financing for development, and the midterm review of Sarmad pathway for small island developing countries. Then there will be also a high-level review of the universal health coverage. There will be 5 summits in 1 week. These will provide opportunities for all countries to assess progress made in addressing climate and sustainable development challenges, and to further strengthen international cooperation in support of all people and our planet. This week's event in Copenhagen are an excellent opportunity to strengthen the momentum needed for successful implementation of the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. I think my department is prepared to support you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Liu. And let's hear from Mr. Sarmad of the UNFCCC. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. And as I mentioned this morning, and we heard from many of the distinguished speakers, the importance of why we are here, what we need to do. So I'll focus on what we need to do. Put simply, we need to put the brake on deadly greenhouse gas emissions and drive climate action. We need to rapidly shift away from our dependence on fossil fuels. We need to replace them with clean energy from water, wind, and the sun. And as was mentioned, we have the tools, we have the technology, we have the agreements, but we need now the political will. We must halt deforestation, restore degraded forests, and change the way we farm. We need to embrace the circular economy and resource efficiency. Our cities and transport sectors will need to be overhauled. How we heat, cool, light our buildings will need to be rethought so we waste less energy. And this is exactly where this conversation has become more exciting and urgency of action that is needed. So, all in all, I think what we need to do is we make sure that through our efforts, and the United Nations is engaged in doing that, to bring all stakeholders, all partners, all societies, governments, private sectors together to collectively take action. And the Secretary General Summit this year is going to be extremely important towards that. And after that, the COP in Chile in December. So we have great opportunities and venues for the meetings that we need to take serious action and demonstrate that we are really very serious for the present and the future, as also was mentioned by the Minister of Finance today. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll go to you, Mr. Finance Minister.
Well, thank you, and thank you also for the opportunity to participate here. I think that it's obvious for many of us how huge the challenge is, and that we need to put a brake on CO2 emissions and fossil fuels. I just think that many of us are still lagging behind how and what are we to do in order to get from the understanding to the action. Denmark has showcased for many years that it's possible to increase our growth. Our GDP has been doubled over the last almost 3 decades, even though our energy consumption has been flat and the CO2 emission has gone down. But this has not come just by itself. It has come through political actions, through the willingness also to invest in the beginning from the Ministry of Finance into supporting renewables. But what we see right now is that renewables in Denmark are cheaper than coming from a beginning, a flat starting point, coal and other forms of traditional energy. So what we can do now is actually have a business case in renewables that are stronger than a business case in traditional if we start from scratch. And then, of course, we need to find a way to go away from all the investments that has been made in order to a new form of renewables. We need to look into how to make systems work closer. One of the more tragic things is that we are actually producing a lot of energy that are not being moved to places where it's needed, but are being wasted because we don't have the right infrastructure. So in order to have a CO2 emissions going down at the pace that is necessary, we need to invest not only in production, but also in infrastructure to transport the energy to the right places. We need to do this at the same time as we need still to lift millions of people out of poverty and into decent jobs, but without creating a CO2 disaster as if they were doing it the same way as we did back in the industrialization of the Western world. So we need to take all the knowledge we have to create new partnerships in order to set new path for countries that are willing to take on a green transformation as well. We're humbled to be asked by the Secretary General to facilitate the outcome of the energy transition track leading up to the Climate Action Summit in New York in September. We're collaborating closely with Ethiopia and Sustainable Energy for All to ensure that there's an outreach, and we'd like to invite all actors to come. What I see right now is a situation where the push from investors, the demand for customers, and the need for employees to work with purpose are creating the perfect platform for companies to go into sustainability. And in Denmark, more and more of our largest companies are pledging to reach sustainability and CO2 neutrality by 2040 or even 2030. And if we can get this moving, we can really make a shift where not only state actors, but also non-state actors are pledging up to the summit in September. And I think we need to move, and we need to move even faster than we're doing right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And now let's hear more about the Climate Summit from Ambassador de Alba.
Good morning. Well, it is a pleasure to be in Denmark, and it is a pleasure to testify on the willingness of the government to do transformational change, and that's one of the reasons why Denmark has been asked to co-lead on energy, but I want to pay tribute to the overall policy. I think Denmark is one of the countries who have clearly understood that climate is not an environmental issue, it is a development issue, and the transformation of the overall economy is necessary to address the challenges. That's why the Secretary General rely on the participation of Denmark and the building of the partnerships that the Minister was already talking about. We are working in different areas, not only on energy, but I would like to highlight the two main elements of the summit. The first would be certainly to recognize that climate is moving much faster than the governments, and we are living in a very difficult situation in which we have limited time to avoid the worst, and the limited time, according to the latest IPCC report on 1.5 degrees, is a little over 11 years, and that's all the time we have. And we need to multiply our actions, in some cases, by 3, 4, or even 5 times. That's the scale of what needs to be done. The Secretary General hoped that by asking some countries to lead and building the partnership, private and public partnerships, we will be able to make a substantial change. But in order to do that, he's calling for action. We are not planning yet for another meeting at the UN on which we will be listening to one speech after the other. The Secretary General has been very clear, asking countries to come with a concrete plan. We will be selecting the presentations that will be done at the summit level, and we will be doing the follow-up of those plans or actions immediately after, so that it is going to be a meeting on which we will foster implementation of commitments. Let me just end by recognizing that we have made quite a lot of progress in terms of the negotiating process. We have already a solid framework for international cooperation, which is in the Paris Agreement, and we have now to show the necessary political will to move forward and deliver what the society is asking us. It is quite important, and I will end with this, also to recognize the youth movement and the anger which is behind the lack of action. It's an issue that we need to respond. We need to make sure that the public opinion in general understand the need to act and the possibilities of doing that in the very short term, and governments need to respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Special Envoy. And with that, we will turn to Ms. Mizutori from the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction.
Thank you very much. In 2015, the member states of the United Nations in March 2015 agreed to the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. This is one of the first agreements of what we call the Agenda 2030, and it focuses on disaster risk reduction. It is an agenda about building resilience in the society and preventing. When we do not prevent, when we do not build resilience in the society, we see what disasters can do. We are witnessing this as we talk right now in Africa, in Mozambique, in Zimbabwe, in Malawi. The horrific number of lives that have been lost, the economy just devastated, all the years and all the resources that went into the development of these countries are all gone. But it's not only there. It doesn't stop there, because when we think about the children, when are they going to go back to school? They won't go back to school for perhaps months, maybe a year, and then they lose opportunity for education. And then how about their employment? With everything devastated, they're not going to have employment like they had planned. The government had planned for their future, but now their future is devastated. So this is what happens if we cannot reduce the risk of disasters. And 90% of the major disasters in the last 20 years have been caused by extreme weather events. So there is a very, very close linkage between disasters and climate change. And also, when we look at the extensive disasters, the ones that creep in, like drought, we don't see what's happening immediately, but droughts displace people. Now, displacement is caused more by disaster than by conflict. And every year, 26 million people are driven back to poverty because of disasters. So, as all my distinguished colleagues have been saying, we need to tackle all these agendas together: disaster risk reduction, climate change, and ultimately really have a sustainable development. If not, we are failing. And the youth know this. That's why they don't go to school. Why do they have to go to school if there's no future for them to study, right? So let's learn more for the youth, and let's change the gear of our action. But I think we are getting there. Let's be optimistic. Let's not wait for the next disaster to happen. Let's wait for the next opportunity to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I would also like to welcome our webcast audience and our Facebook audience. We actually have a question from our remote viewers. This is from a reporter from the Malta Business Weekly, and it is for Mr. de Alba. She says, 2 reports just issued by leading NGOs found that since the Paris Agreement adoption, 33 leading banks have financed fossil fuel activities, while the top 5 oil majors companies had spent $200 million a year lobbying to delay, control, or block policies to tackle climate change. So will the Climate Summit specifically address these activities and propose more constructive pathways?
Very interesting question. Well, let me tell you that the summit is being organized, as I mentioned before, not to have a statements and a declaration, and that will include all partners. We need very concrete actions and commitments, but I think it is possible to have actions that addresses positively what needs to be done in terms of transformation and investment. And it should be possible also to address the need of disinvesting in some of the companies and the areas on which fossil fuels are involved. So I'm very open to that.
Thank you, sir. And now for the folks in the room here, any questions? Yes, sir.
My name is Zhenmin from Royal Pass in Denmark. Secretary, I want to ask you a question. Now, Denmark and China is good friendship. How do you think that between Denmark and China, business in the future?
That's a good question, but I'm not in a good position to respond. Maybe the minister will respond nicely, because I'm not in the UN. But I want to highlight in front of the Danish media that today everybody talking about 2015. We have the Sendai Agreement on reduction for disasters. We talked about Addis Ababa Agenda for Financial Development. We talked about 2030 Agenda as SDGs, and we talked Paris Agreement. But we should not forget that what Copenhagen Conference in 2009 contributed. Because we started talking about nationally determined contributions from Copenhagen. This finalized in Paris Agreement. So it means that without Copenhagen Conference, there would be no Paris Agreement. So I think in Copenhagen, we will have this global conference on synergies between Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda. We really need to continue to acknowledge the great contribution of Copenhagen Conference made to the climate change negotiations. Thank you.
Would anyone else on the panel care to respond? Nope. Okay. Any other questions from the audience here? Okay. If not, then we thank you very much, panelists, for being here, and we thank you for being here and for our web audience as well. Thank you and have a good day.